I will exercise the function of the head of government of the Republic of Uganda, so help me God.
I have been honored by the highest order of the conqueror of the British imperialism in Uganda.
This I must make it absolutely clear. You must teach people to love their leader.
If the people want me, I will go back, and I am sure I will contribute more for the people of Uganda.
All the people who were in that time, at least we have to remember our people who passed away. Me, I'm not happy if I see Amin again.
I heard that he even killed his own child.
Very few of the children in the age range of 20 and below have heard about Idi Amin. So when they come and see things like this, they really get interested.
Idi Amin returned to Uganda in the form of American actor Forrest Whitaker, who's starring in The Last King of Scotland, a thriller set in Amin's Uganda. This is the first time since his death that Idi Amin has been portrayed on film. The Last King of Scotland is based on the novel by Giles Foden and tells the story of a fictional Scottish doctor, played by James McAvoy, who becomes Idi Amin's closest friend and advisor.
Scottish? Why didn't you say so?
The making of this film, by a British crew in Uganda, about such a controversial figure, raises a number of questions. How will Ugandans react to this interpretation of their history, and how does their view of Idi Amin differ from that of the West? How do you place a fictional story into a historical setting? And is it possible to separate the real Idi Amin from the strange and bizarre stories that surround him?
Well, one of the things that has occurred to me while I've been here is that, up until Nelson Mandela, I think Idi Amin was the most famous African ever in history.
Ever since he came to power in 1971, there has been no end to the strange and sometimes horrific stories of how he's been holding on to power in Uganda. There have been reports of numerous massacres, and 12 of his ministers have already fled the country.
All the stories about his cannibalism and witchcraft and multiple partners, and he kind of represents all that's worst and most savage about the dark continent.
The pictures that I had was a sort of colonialized version of who he was. This monster image of a black African man who was evil incarnate. Certainly there were many travesties that happened, but it's a much more complicated and complete story, and he's a much more whole man than the image that I had.
One thing I like about this particular script is that it's not just a demonization of Idi Amin, and in a way creates what the international community did not see of Idi Amin.
Amin's rating in the country is different from what people think in the outside. I think some people still think rate Amin is high, very high. He's a patriot, he's a nationalist.
To me, Amin, I think he's a hero. I look at him as a hero who tried to bring out Uganda's nationality and trying to uplift the cultural heritage of our country. I met him, I was doing a brass band, and everybody was fighting for his hand. It was so huge, and when I put my little palm, my little hand, it just disappeared into his paper. It's as if I had no palm at all. Yeah.
He made himself this Superman, this demigod who could do things that hadn't done before. He could dare the British. He could dare the Americans. He could anybody. He threatened to go to South Africa and kick out the Boers. He was that type of guy. He recruited people. He offered aid to the British. that was fun. He was a funny guy.
Idi Amin, most amazing man there's ever been. He the general, the president, the king of the scene. Idi
Amin, the most amazing man that the world has seen. Now the general, the president, the king of the scene. Idi Amin.
Uganda motto! Uganda motto!
Amin was larger than life. He was a huge figure. I'm 6'4", and even I felt somewhat dwarfed by him. But he was bulky with it. I mean, initially he was always quite jolly, and the whole of him kind of erupted into There was nothing really immediately sinister about him, and yet his eyes were rather cold.
I wanted to ask you, are you not afraid of interviewing the conqueror of the British Empire as you are British? You are not afraid of...
The film of The Last King of Scotland and the novel that it's based upon place a completely fictional character into the court of Idi Amin.
There have been one or two people who've read it as pure history, which it isn't. It is a fiction. I often say it's sort of 80% fiction, but mostly fact, which sort of gives a sense of its confused status like that.
I read the book 7 years ago. What I loved about Last King of Scotland, that you had the thriller aspect, the element of it, but set against this regime that existed.
The film's director is Kevin MacDonald, a documentary maker best known for the award-winning Touching the Void. This is his first non-documentary film.
Our aim was never to make a film that is historically accurate. We have taken liberties, as the novel does. And I think one of the reasons that we feel happy doing that, with Amin in particular, is because there's something about him which is kind of almost more fictional than it is real. You never really can pin down what the historical reality is.
Amin has now, over time, become part of the entertainment scene in Uganda. In terms of real memory, he's sinking back into the archives.
There are few facts about Amin's early life. What is known is that he joined the British Army in 1946, where he soon proved himself to be an accomplished sportsman, and he was Ugandan heavyweight boxing champion for 9 years.
I knew him terribly well for 10 years. I would say quite honestly, this man is a good friend. He had that wonderful, indefinable quality of leadership. He was a born leader of men. And he was a very successful soldier.
When he was in the British Army, he was a kind of licensed killer. And there were all sorts of stories about the things that he did when he was in the British Army. And that was kind of let go because he was, you know, as I say, he was licensed to do those things.
How are you, Kim? Good to see you. Yeah. How's it going? How's it going? Have you got a Ugandan handshake yet?
I've got the Ugandan handshake. I know them all.
I think we can say the British were responsible for Amin, though. They found him, they made him a sergeant major, and because they had not produced a black officer class in Uganda at independence, they said, OK, who are our most senior people? We have got, look at this big chap.
By the time Uganda achieved independence from Britain in 1961, the British had promoted Amin to the rank of Effendi, thereby ensuring that he was one of the most powerful men in the Ugandan army. This gave him the opportunity to seize power from President Milton Obote in a military coup in 1971.
The reality about Amin is that everyone in the country really welcomed him coming to power, and there was kind of jubilation on the streets. But we start with that kind of Amin who's loved by his people.
We men of the Uganda Armed Forces have decided to take over power from Obote and hand it to our fellow soldier, Major General Idi Amin Dada.
Oh, it was very, very hopeful. It was the masses, the kind of rallies we used to address an army vehicle. They would just stop, then all the people would get onto it. Seemed almost the setting in of a brave new world.
He's like the first president who came out to the people, the first president who seemed to care.
Although Dr. Garrigan is a fictional character, it is true that whilst president, Idi Amin was treated by a number of British doctors.
I think he was at times what we call hypomanic. He was excited. He felt that he had a better understanding than most people of what was going on, and that his ideas, which on the whole were fairly obvious, were in fact rather the ideas of a genius, and that he owed it to the world to put the world right.
Recently, General Amin sent a telegram to the Queen inviting himself on a state visit to Britain this August. He told the Queen he wanted to meet leaders of British liberation movements, the Welsh, Irish and Scottish nationalists. The Queen has not yet replied to this telegram.
Other examples of it were, I think, the fact that he talked so much. People who become excited, who have ideas of grandeur, who think that they have the answer to complicated problems, and in a sense lose touch with everyday reality.
As the character of Dr. Garrigan is drawn closer into the world of President Amin, he witnesses the increasing brutality of the regime.
We couldn't do a film about the human side of Idi Amin without showing some of the real brutality that happened, and we had to show that as well as the more charismatic, humorous side that people, also fell for.
Reports started filtering to Amin and creating the suspicions, which I think was the ignition point for the paranoia that eventually led to most of the actions he took.
I would assess Amin as a very sensitive person, like any other president. If you identify yourself that you want to remove him from his power, so you are an enemy. So he will react against you in any way he likes.
British government has broken its promises to Uganda. Because of this, I have decided to expel all Asians from this country.
Idi Amin's announcement that he was giving all Asians living in Uganda just 90 days to leave the country caused an international outcry and was met with horror by his British mentors.
My economy, it has been milked by the non-citizens of Uganda. I will not allow this in Uganda.
The worsening relationship between Britain and Uganda is one of the themes that The Last King of Scotland explores.
This film's not just about Idi, it's not just about Uganda, it's also about how Britain, and maybe the rest of the world, but certainly Britain, I'd say Britain more than anywhere, looked at Uganda at this time. Because I'm very much Britain's looking glass in this film,
Look at this! The British newspapers call me a madman.
the American newspapers say I am a cannibal.
In the early 1970s, there was still a lot of racism about, and I think that Amin appealed to a racist stereotype of Africa. If he hadn't existed, we would have had to invent him. He was a perfect kind of larger-than-life, ogreous, you know, people-eating monster of a dictator.
And he became hugely good copy. And people didn't necessarily pay attention to the more serious side of him, both positive and negative, because they were so loving him as a kind of caricature.
There was no great interest in portraying Africa as anything other than a basket case, and Amin was a classic African dictator. That kind of fulfilled a tabloid need. See, that's what they're like.
He is a cannibal. These are lies.
One of the reasons why he's so demonized too is because of he was a figure that really stood against, you know, colonization, and very clearly that's what he did. He was like, get out, we can handle our own affairs. And there's very few people who have done that.
They should not continue with the propaganda, because today I can control the British myself.
195, take one. Margaret, come on.
It's also been reported that you crowned yourself last King of Scotland.
In 1974, Idi Amin offered to head the fight for Scottish independence and proclaimed himself last King of Scotland. He had developed a lifelong affection for the country, whilst in the King's African Rifles, where his commanding officers were all Scottish.
We might appear sometimes to be very bossy, telling you what to do, but it's only because we need to get the job done.
I think Amin was like a kind of distorted mirror reflecting back to the colonial masters in Britain what he had learned from them. So he took ideas like bagpipes, kilts, and imposed them into a completely inappropriate world.
By attaching himself to Scotland, and in particular the idea of an independent Scotland, he was able to keep a connection to the colonial power, one that he wanted, and yet also fight against it. He wanted the connection but hated it at the same time.
If you go to Scotland, you will talk to the people, they will welcome you to their house. If you go to where there is English, they don't want to sit near African. If they see a black man, they say he's a monkey or dogs. English themselves, they are the racialists completely, not Scottish.
But in some horrible way, he was like a sort of puppet that's come to life. He was like a plaything of the empire that turned around and said, boo.
If you're going to do any nasty scarring, I think that this little guy's left leg a little. I have to say, I really feel this is great.
No blood, I think no blood.
I really think no blood.
They've been battered to death.
Absolutely.
Isolated abroad, and with mounting opposition at home, an increasingly paranoid Amin began to place uneducated tribesmen and soldiers in governmental posts and positions of power. They were able to detain and to kill with immunity.
I've got some secret files here. I found these at the command post after the Tanzanians liberated, right? Wow. In here, which is, I think, the most sinister document of all, is a list of employees of the State Research Department. You remember what that was?
I know, I do.
That was the secret police. Yeah.
Those state research bureaus where fellows who were always so flamboyant in dress. Idi Amin had very smart soldiers and very smart intelligence guys, so they have all these well-polished shoes, and then always wore dark shades.
It's impossible to overstate just how frightening and terrifying this place was. Everybody was watching everybody else. In one of the files that I recovered from the command post, lists and lists and lists of state security people. That means lists and lists of the people who were spying on each other, on everyone else. You know, the paranoia, that's what it was, paranoia.
State research, we are so scared of them. You are walking the street, you see a soldier, you just dodge and find another route. We are very, very scared of soldiers.
They were the people who had no value for human beings. And I remember one of the soldiers, Maria Mungu, who said that it was more expensive to kill a chicken than a human being because you pay for the chicken. They had no value for life.
Good. I've been sacrificed. Most of the actors, the young men who are acting, they don't know what the hell Amin is all about. So they don't know what memories go by Amin.
Quite a few people involved in the film who have had a very strong personal experience of Idi. And when they tell you their experiences, it really stops you short to remind you, if you weren't aware already, that it is a very important story that we're telling and that we need to try and get it as right as we possibly can.
Yeah, in the film, I played the character of the Air Force commander. Idi Amin whisked him away. So my role was brief. To me, I think Idi Amin, I think he was monstrous. Because I lived through his time, and I know he was monstrous. But if I took an example of my own father, he was a senior police officer in this country, and Idi Amin picked a bone with him, so he finds him, and sometime about February of 1971 or March, he was among the prisoners transferred to Mutukula government prison, which is in the border of Tanzania. They took him there with 1,500 other prisoners, and there he was killed. They just mutilated him. So he lives among the mass grave, mutilated in a pit somewhere in Tanzania border. This was premeditated killing of innocent people, political opponents.
This is a mass grave in which at least 100 bodies lie buried, all victims of Idi Amin's army. The corpses include those of women and young children. The grave is the most appalling single piece of evidence yet found in Uganda on the scale and the type of killing which the country's endured under Amin.
During these dangerous times, Michael's generation grew up hearing strange and dark myths about their leader. That Amin ate the flesh of his victims, and that he killed his own son.
Up to now, it's very difficult for me to believe that Amin didn't eat the liver of his son, Moses. Such a scary image had been spread about Idi Amin that you felt everything negative said was true. We feared him so much. If he could kill so much, maybe he could also do some of these other things.
Another of these myths is that Amin killed his second wife, Kay, and mutilated her body.
Kay was Amin's wife number 2. She was a pleasant lady. I knew her quite well. She was well educated, and we thought it was a welcome development because he was able to polish his English.
The filmmakers used the myths around Kay for dramatic effect by placing Dr. Garrigan at the center of her story.
It was important for me to not know anything. It was important for me to believe it all, really. Because as soon as I start realising what's really not real, I'll start to justify reasons why we should cut things.
And we debated for a long time about whether using the story of Kay was the right thing to do because it's such a horrific story. But we really wanted to show was the violence that was very close to Idi.
There are things about her life that people are very sensitive about in Uganda. People who remember her get very upset when they talk about her. While it's true that she did have an affair behind Idi's back and she did become pregnant and seek an illegal abortion, she did not have an affair with a white man, which is, I guess, dramatic license.
It's probably the only time in the film where Garrigan actually is inserted into a historical event, and that historical event is shifted to make room for him.
Kay's body was found dismembered in the back of a car. To this day, it is not clear how she died or who killed her. What is known is that Idi Amin ordered the limbs to be sewn back on so that the family could view the body.
The body was prepared for viewing. He directed me to have that done and for me to be there when he came to look at the deceased mother.
And I need you to trust me, okay? I'm your friend. I won't let you see anything you don't want to see, okay? You need to trust me.
Background!
We just felt that it was such a powerful moment to dramatise Idi's frame of mind and the way that Idi operated. It was valid to use it, and that we weren't just being gratuitous about it. For a while, Michael Carlin, the designer, had these sketches on his wall of different positions that the limbs could be in. I guess we thought that was probably the way that it would have been.
People have tried to be too clever by half, by saying all sorts of things about Kay's body. They said Amin ordered the limbs to be sewn back on the reverse, but this was rubbish. That one I can still say it with good authority as Minister of Health at the time.
Idi Amin kills her, takes the body and cuts her up and sews the parts on differently, which is one of the most gruesome images in the film. And I think that image will stick with people really strongly. And that's not true.
ngukubazi kuca mutogaruko karwana nagaruka narwana rutara kurwana bo mwishazi nayibambarika muno mukaciro kambubulicore kankumire nakweboneye nagamawe.
Recently, I started to wonder why make this film. I know that personally I have worked really hard to find the spirit of this man that I can. And I am very sensitive to his portrayal as an African figure.
I can't wait to see how the Ugandans react to the film, really. I think it's really a big unknown. I think anytime somebody sees a film about themselves, it's always quite hard to watch because they can see the difference between the specific reality and the generality of the film.
From this film, the best part of it is to bring back the history that people are so rapidly forgetting, because if we do not look at our history, we will not know where we are going. And until we start looking at our history very critically and know where the mistakes in the history, only then can we try to pave way for the future history.
Our sons will ask us, how could Amin have come into power? How? Because they didn't see it. And so it's easy for it to happen again, because they don't know. Exposure with films like this maybe will help people know such things happen. You go to the West and you find these guys don't know where Uganda is on the map, but they know Idi Amin. So we should strive to make the country bigger than Amin.